I'd like to do now is to continue in our presentations. It's my pleasure to introduce NJBIA's Chief Economic Advisor, Joel Naroff. Joel has been engaged as our... You're also excited to get him up here. I want to tell you a little bit about him. Joel's been engaged as our economic advisor for over the past year and is working to provide us with data and information to help us formulate policies to advance our support for members in the state of New Jersey and the issues you all find to be important. Today, Joel is presenting an overview of his first major research project that he's conducting for NJBIA, a look at the state's economic foundation and the issues being faced by our members and the state as a whole. Joel's executive summary can be found in New Jersey Business Magazine starting on page 32. Please join me in welcoming Joel Naroff.
What the NJBIA tasked myself to do, and it's myself, Naroff Economic Advisors, in conjunction with eConsult Solutions, is to benchmark the state's economy in order to determine where we are. If we want to get somewhere, we ought to know our starting point, so we have a real foundation for discussing the kinds of issues, the kinds of policies we need to implement in order to get to a stronger New Jersey economy. Lay the foundation so that as we move forward, growth will move from this current period where we're beginning to come back again to really solid, if not strong growth. And so we needed to benchmark it and to find out where we are. And part of the issue we have, and where this really arose from, was the idea that if you take a look at all the indices that are out there, the rankings, how many of you have seen rankings of states on something or other? Just about everybody. Indeed, it seems that everybody has their own rankings. And we were sitting around, Michelle and I were talking about how do we do things? How do we develop policies? How do we understand why New Jersey has a tendency to rank pretty low as far as most of these rankings are concerned? What is it within these rankings that we need to change in order to move the needle? Because no matter how good or bad they may be, the reality is people look at them, and there are impressions that are created by these rankings. So I set out to take a look at some of the rankings, and I say some of them. And I managed to take a look at about 38 of them. There are more than that. And there were 130 variables. And I said to myself, how do you make any heads or tails out of all of these? And the fact is that it's almost impossible to do that. It's almost impossible because of the simple fact that everybody has their own way of creating an index. For those statistical geeks that we have here, like myself, just how do you take one variable, a group of variables, and put them together? The rankings, how do you value the rankings? How do you value the variables of them? It's just random. Everybody has their own way of looking at it. And so anybody who's worked with rankings, anybody who's worked with indices knows how you weight the different variables determines where you come out on them. So I'm looking at this. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then we run into things like what is good and what is bad. And I like to use, especially in New Jersey, the example of the question, is a low gasoline tax good or bad? Right? I mean, nobody wants to pay higher gasoline taxes, that's for certain. So in most of these rankings, most of these indices that look at taxes, a low gasoline tax is usually considered very good. However, gasoline taxes are needed to provide the funding for infrastructure. So if you have a low gasoline tax and you don't have any money in your trust fund to do any infrastructure spending, is the low gasoline tax good or bad? It's probably bad under those circumstances. So value judgments come into place. So I came to the conclusion that these are really nice, they're wonderful, it's fun, we all do them, I've done them, I've taken part in them, but you really can't make a whole lot of heads and tails out of what's going on. So what you really need to do is create a different framework in evaluating the variables. Because if we just took the 130 variables, we could benchmark them. I think Michelle, when we started the project, sent me a list of 693, was it, that she wanted us to look at. And if I went across this room, we'd see a large number of variables. And it didn't make sense, because how do you do a report, how do you benchmark it, that people can actually make use of? Okay? And the purpose of this report was to provide a foundation for evaluating the issues facing the state so that policies and directions can be taken. Policies can be made and directions are taken. It's not the purpose of the report to propose policies, but provide the foundation that we can use to look at what needs to be done. So we at eConsult and Naroff Economic Advisor sat around and discussed, if we're going to move the state forward, we really need to structure the economy so that it fits in with the emerging trends and the evolving issues that will face New Jersey in the years to come. We can fix some of the problems now, but what's much more important is to look to the future and create that kind of economy that really fits in well with the future. And there are several key issues. These are not the only ones, but to me they were some of the key issues that we saw in terms of trends that are obvious right now and will be with us for at least another 10 and probably 20 years, that we need to position the state so that it can be a major player in the world economy to come. And so we came up with 3 of them, and I'll just do them very quickly. One is the technical innovation economy. This is nothing different than we've seen in the past. Basically, it's innovation. And you have a changing level of skills that you need to have. So in an innovation economy, do we have the labor force? Do we have the workforce and the educational systems that will feed into the innovation economy that will allow the state to get its fair share, if not more than its fair share of growth as we go forward? The second is something we all know about, but really I don't think understand particularly well, the mobile and on-demand economy. It's really the internet-based economy. When we think of the internet, when we think of the mobile economy, we just think of getting on the net wherever we happen to be with whatever device we happen to be and doing something. But the real issue with an internet economy and the mobile economy is that it's a goods and services. We're buying it from different places, but we're still distributing it. And we need to have the ability to take part in that particularly well. So the distribution capacity, I mean, if you think of the clearest mobile economy, Amazon, what are they? They're a distribution system, right? So if you think about it that way, how do we become a key player in the distribution system that's out there? And the last thing is, if you think we're involved in a global economy now, wait a few years. It'll be only much more extensive. I wrote a book called Big Picture Economics, and I made the argument that the world is not flat. The world is actually a Mobius strip. Everybody know what a Mobius strip is? If you start in one place and you go along the entire edge, you wind up where you started from. And that's really what it is. We're all integrated. You don't fall off the end. You come back. We're all together. And that's only going to get a lot more involved as we go through the years. So the state must be very closely linked to the world economy. But overarching all of this, we can be a good technical innovation economy. We can have distribution. We can be involved in world trade. Overarching all of this is the environment in which businesses operate. And we know that. If we're not good, if we're not a place, as Michelle was talking about, where we have all of these issues, we're going to have some problems. And so we need to take a look at that. And that's the foundation in which we kind of came up with our study. And when we looked at the variables, instead of just benchmarking them, we asked the question, where do they fit? and how do they help the state or not help the state. So we came up with some good or bad. And there are some discussions in the magazine, and I'm just going to go through this quickly. In about a month or so, we're going to do more of a full-blown blow-up, rollout of the report so that we can provide more of the details. What we see here is the state's really incredibly well-positioned to face the future. I mean, if you really look at what are our strengths, they really do match those issues that I talked about before, the three major factors there. We have a fantastic transportation system. We have proximity and capacity to reach the global and domestic economies. We have a highly educated workforce with the technical skills to meet that innovation economy. We have a high level of technically trained people with the kinds of companies that can be at the leading edge of the innovation economy. And we have really the economic potential, whether that's through income or through density. I mean, businesses can locate here and find their markets here because of the high density of income and population that we have here. So we really are extraordinarily well positioned. We should be close to the top of the pecking order, close to the top of the rankings when it comes to economic growth as we go forward because we have everything in place. You know, but as we always know, where there's good, there's always bad. And obviously, and Michelle talks about it, I don't have to, you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously. You know, if you look at the environment, our operating costs here are extremely high. I don't have to go into that. We all know about that. We'll talk a little bit about that when we benchmark it. But the issue that concerns me, in addition to that, I mean, that's the first big issue because that's the environment. But for example, infrastructure. We may have a great rail system that can reach everywhere, and a highway system, and a port system, and an airport in this state, and airports in the state that are busy. But we have some significant underfunding of all of those. And it's not just the state's financial problems. It's the lack of funding that we're getting from the federal government as well. And so this puts at risk one of the major advantages that we have. We find that when I look at the issue of how much research and development funding that's pouring into the state, which is really the foundations for the innovation economy, we're just not ranking up there. It's just not near the top. And that's critical because we need the R&D in order to develop the products. And when you develop the products, when you have the breakthroughs, there's where the companies come, and there's where the growth comes from. We have problems with that. We obviously have a congested transportation system. If distribution is critical, if it's congested, having a great highway system where you can't move is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. So we've got some issues there. And we have also the high cost of living. And that affects in-migration and out-migration. It's not just the out-migration, it's the in-migration. Do we get what we pay for here? Obviously, if we're paying a lot and we're getting a lot, you know, that's okay. But if we're paying a lot but not getting it, and it's creating some barriers to growth, it's a real problem. And the last thing I came up with is that whenever you do any of these rankings, sometimes you're right in the middle. And that's the who knows what. So we have the good, the bad, and the who knows what. And there are a number of other of these where we rank in the middle. And it's interesting to note that as much as we talk about the problems we have with the state's finances and spending, we actually rank more towards the middle of the pack as far as state spending policy is concerned. And it's the least dependent on the federal government. I say that politely. That's kind of a politically correct way of saying that we're not getting enough money back from the taxes we pay, okay? Yeah. But that's a problem because that's an offset. It may, whether it's funds that go into infrastructure, you know, to education, whatever it may be, we're not getting it back. You know, it's in the middle, but we have some issues there. And it's a heavily developed state. Is that good or bad? It's that congestion issue, which is in one part, but the other thing is open space. I mean, we can't compete with other states that can say, well, you can plop this huge manufacturing plant in the middle of nowhere, and we'll run some rail lines or whatever it is out there, and we've got all the land you possibly want. We can't do that. But at the same time, of course, density has helped us. So we've got a variety of issues that we have. The state is extraordinarily well positioned to take advantage of all the big trends that are coming. We should be at the top of economic growth. The question is, what kind of things can we do now to position the state so over the next 5 to 10 years we do reach that full potential and we really start growing towards the top of the rankings rather than towards the bottom. And that's what this report was all about. Thank you. Okay, if you've got some questions, we've got some time. We're running a little ahead of schedule, so you got some questions? Would you like me to do an economic forecast? I can do a soft shoe. Yes, okay, go ahead.
So when you talk about the workforce,
We have a microphone.
Yeah, it's okay.
so when you talked about the workforce and education, there are two things that I didn't hear that I think are important. Maybe you can
Sure.
just flesh out. Number one, that educated workforce doesn't necessarily mean a 4-year college degree, but technical training, and I think that's important, particularly in manufacturing.
Absolutely.
And the second point that I think maybe should be highlighted is there's a tremendous number of college students that leave the state compared to other states in the nation, and that causes a brain drain, perhaps long term. Could you just comment on that?
Sure.
A little bit?
Let me comment on both of them. The first thing, and again, if I take off my research hat and put on my policy hat, okay, and if that's okay here, the first thing about technical education is something that's really been close to my heart for probably 40 years. My first career was as a college professor at the University of Massachusetts at the business school there. And I did my best testifying in front of the state legislature and arguing that community colleges should be technical colleges. They shouldn't be, liberal arts colleges. Why? Because we need a certain level of training, whether it's at the high school level or whether it's at the community college level, in order to provide the kinds of skills that even in the 70s that I saw was being created in the changing economic environment. And so the issue of technical education, you're absolutely right. It's not necessarily that do we have PhDs in computer engineering, okay? It's that do we have the students who come out, wherever they come out of, high school, community colleges, graduate school, with the kinds of skills that match the emerging needs within the business community. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is the brain drain. And that's a little bit more difficult, but it also reflects on some of the comments I made there. When I said we have a high cost of living, one of the issues, of course, with the high cost of living is can our college graduates, our younger adults who have the skills, the drive, and the lack of income to stay. And here, there's something going on that I think will play, more and more into the New Jersey's advantage. The advantage of being densely populated with a large number of cities and a variety of different communities is that millennials have a different view of the world than, previous generations. And they're really what I call involved in the regentrification of our urban areas. I say regentrification because the initial gentrification was done by baby boomers. In the late 70s and 80s, when the boomers moved back into the city and gentrified, they became the new urban gentry. Okay, boomers eventually created the massive outflow into the suburbs. Will there be a difference? And this is the real question. And this may not even be a policy issue, but it's a trend issue. It's my argument that this time it's different. And the reason it's different is that what's the American dream? I'm a leading edge baby boomer. I grew up in a housing project in Queens. If I walked on the grass, I got fined. That's the truth, okay? You weren't allowed to walk on the grass in a housing project. It was a city-owned housing project, okay? To me, moving out into the suburbs and having a house with a lawn was the greatest thing, since sliced bread. Well, all the millennials grew up with sliced bread. Right? A lot of, not all of them, obviously, but they lived the American dream. It's nothing, been there, done that. To them, it's a different kind of thing. That doesn't mean when they move back in, they might not move back out, but they won't have the drive to go to the suburbs for a house, with a lawn, because they grew up in the suburbs with a house for the lawn. So demographic changes may actually be working in New Jersey's favor. That's where the issue of density comes in. And is it good or bad? It may be because of the millennials taking over. And within a decade, they'll make up about half the workforce. We may just be able to take advantage of that given the structure of the state, okay? Questions? Yes?
Two things when it came to infrastructure. First, you say that it is transportation infrastructure is part of our strengths. And then when you look at our weaknesses here in the state, you mentioned that the lack of the underfunding on the federal and the state level, and also the congested transportation system are two weaknesses that we have. With that in mind, would you counsel this business association to advocate for increase in the gas tax?
Okay. If I would put on strictly my economist hat, you have to ask the question, and I'm not trying to skirt it, obviously. If infrastructure and distribution is critical to the future growth of the economy, you have to do what is necessary in any shape, form, or manner to fund the infrastructure. Pennsylvania has done some imaginative things in trying to fund it because they didn't want to raise the gasoline tax. Well, they raised the gasoline tax by taxing wholesalers instead of retailers, so they raised the gasoline tax. But there's a variety of ways of approaching it. While I may say raising the gasoline tax is one element of it, you've got to remember, to the extent we have hybrids, to the extent the CAFE standards are constantly rising, to the extent that Tesla is going to destroy every trust fund that exists in this country, just having a gasoline tax is not going to be enough. Because if I drive, think about it. If I drive a Tesla, and I don't, I just ride in one because my best friend has one, all right? Not only doesn't he pay gasoline taxes, but he gets subsidized for driving the heaviest car on the road, which destroys the roadway. All right? So, man, do we have irrational public policy going on here, all right? But the simple fact is that as we have hybrids, as CAFE standards rise, as electric cars begin to become even more efficient, the gasoline tax is just one element in the solution. It is not the one you have to look at, the only one you can look to it. You have to be much more imaginative going forward because it's not going to raise what we thought it would raise in the past, okay? In the here and now, do I advocate? What I just said is what I advocate. I advocate a complete restructuring of the way we fund infrastructure. You can't simply depend strictly on the gasoline tax. It is one part of it. So raising it would be only one element in a full-blown, restructured policy so that we have a consistent cash flow into the infrastructure spending needs that will allow us to maintain that. All I'm saying is it's only one element. And we shouldn't just look at it as the answer, but as part of the answer.